Chapter 251, The Potion Formulas for the Seer Pathway. Klein leaned back in his chair and tried to communicate with the spirit via dream divination. In a gray illusory world that didn't seem surreal, a gas lamp suddenly lit up, illuminating the stone slabs on the ground and a desk with a goatskin scroll placed on top of it. After the seer and clown formulas appeared one after the another, Rosago stood there with a fur shirt, listening to a voice of unknown origins. Before the advancement, I have to warn you that you've been too reliant on divination. Divination is a revelation, a result, it is unable to tell us the process. For example, you might decide to invest all your money because your divination says that a railway stock can make money. But in fact, what that revelation really means is that in the long run, in 30 years, the railway stock will make money, and before that, it will fall more than it rises. Fate isn't so easy to master, and there are many times when it's impossible to quantify it. Divination isn't all-powerful. In addition, divination can be interfered with and cause you to be misled. There are too many things in this world that cannot be understood. If you completely rely on divination, then you'll definitely die because of it. Divination is a revelation. It must be combined with one's own carefulness, caution, and self-control. Rosago was unable to divine the corresponding danger because the language of foulness was involved with the mysterious space above the grey fog, and that led to him dying at my hands. Otherwise, with his mystical abilities, it would have been difficult for Miss Bodyguard and I to escape today. This is also a reminder for me. Even if I had the grey fog to isolate all interferences, I cannot afford to be careless. No matter how certain my actions are, I need to leave some leeway. From these words, it seems like they aren't aware of the acting method. Otherwise, some of those words could be directly summed up as being respectful and fearful of fate. As his thoughts raced, Klein heard Rosago's reply as he unfurled the parchment. Sequence 7. Magician, main ingredients, 1 true root of a miscreant, all the spinal fluid of a dark-patterned black panther. Supplementary ingredients, 60 ml of purified water, 30 ml of mistrent's juice, 3 grams of droplet gem powder, 4 drops of fantasy grass essential oil. Magician. This is also part of a circus. It can form the foundations of a circus with seers and clowns. Klein first lampooned before he recalled the suited clown that he had encountered before. From the looks of it, he was a magician. His abilities seemed to include the ability to fire air bullets, making flaming jumps, and drawing slips of paper as weapons. Not bad. Just being able to cast spells quickly can greatly increase my battle prowess. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein saw the scene before him change. This time it was a splendid room, surrounded by golden statues and ornaments. It was the same voice from before, but it reminded Rosago of the same thing. According to my experience, after you consume the faceless potion, you have to remember this point: you can disguise yourself into anyone, but you are ultimately yourself. Faceless. Sequence 6 of the Seer Pathway is Faceless Man. This should be the Beyonder power that allowed Rosago to transform into Officer Faxine. From the looks of it, the fake detective's reel was also played by him. Creeping hunger allowed Kalangos to transform into a person with different looks. This matches this Beyonder power. From the looks of it, some faceless died at his hand. Such a power cannot augment a person in a straight-up battle, but it's more useful than 90% of all Beyonder powers in many occasions. It's no wonder that Rosago dared to come and attempt to kill me, and wasn't afraid of falling into a trap. This power is of great significance to me. At this thought, Klein's eyes widened as he saw Rosago pick up a thin gold page with words written in Hermes. Sequence 6, Faceless, main ingredients, mutated pituitary gland of a 1,000-faced hunter, characteristic of a human-skinned shadow. Supplementary ingredients, 80 ml of a 1,000-faced hunter's blood, 5 drops of black jimsonweed juice, 10 grams of dragon tooth grass powder, 3 strands of hair from a deep-sea naga. 1,000-faced hunter. That seems to be a type of dragon, but not a particularly powerful kind. It shouldn't be a dragon of the spiritual system, but it's still extremely rare. It's almost extinct. Klein instantly recalled the corresponding mysticism knowledge. At this point, the scene before him didn't change, but Rosego's attire and location did. He wore a white wig, a dark tuxedo, and had a thick beard. This advancement is no longer as simple as before. The potions must be consumed in conjunction with a ritual. If you succeed, you'll obtain one of the most irresistible Beyonder powers beneath that of the high-sequence Beyonders. The speaker's voice had changed, turning into one that sounded even older. Having expected that, Rosego asked, "What's the ritual?" "Go to the sea, find a mermaid, and drink the potion while she's singing." The speaking old man opened an ancient book that depicted countless mysterious symbols in it. Suddenly, a ray of light flashed from the book's surface as lines of ancient Hermes appeared in midair. Sequence 5, Nimblewright Master. When Klein saw this, he suddenly had a headache. It was a signal that his spirituality was close to being drained. In the previous battle, just the language of Faunus charm, alone, had consumed most of his spirituality. Later on, not only did he use 3 more charms from the Evernight goddess's domain, but he had also summoned himself and responded to himself. To hold out until now showed how much progress he had made compared to before, as well as the noticeable improvement in the digestion of the clown potion. The scene flickered and was on the brink of shattering. Klein held on and scanned the remaining content of the formula. Main ingredients: dust of ancient wraiths, core crystal of a 6-winged gargoyle. Supplementary ingredients: 80 milliliters of spring water from Sonia Island's Golden Spring, 10 grams of Drago bark, remnant spirituality of ancient wraiths, 1 pair of eyes from a 6-winged gargoyle. Advancement ritual: consume potion in the midst of a singing mermaid song. Gotcha. Klein stopped holding out any longer as he allowed the dream to shatter into countless illusory specks of light that disappeared. He pinched his forehead, almost fainting. As the remnants of Rosego's spirituality and the hints of madness faded away, he was pushed back into the real world by an invisible force. The ground, stained with blood, brains, hair, and all sorts of fragments, entered Klein's vision. He bent over and retched a little, clearing his head a little. "I'll be sent out of the mysterious space above the gray fog when I'm out of spirituality." Klein looked around and saw that Miss Bodyguard was still asleep. He hurriedly extinguished the candle, tidied up the items related to the ritual, and then panted heavily. After a while, he finally regained some of his spirituality. At that moment, a gust of cold wind blew at the back of his neck, causing him to shiver as his mind froze. Klein turned his head abruptly and looked at the oriel window again. He saw that Miss Bodyguard in her black Gothic regal dress had woken up and was floating in the air. Her pale blonde hair and pale face seemed to have diminished a little. Her entire person seemed less corporeal, to the point of her skin appearing somewhat transparent. Klein quickly explained according to the explanation he had thought of. "After I blew his head off, I discovered that his body was still squirming. Because I was afraid he would come back alive, I quickly used all the charms on me. I was very nervous and panicked at the time. It might have affected you. This is probably the risk that the divination had revealed earlier. If she's not satisfied with the explanation and thinks that I attacked her, then I'm finished." Klein thought nervously. His true feelings made his performance even more perfect. Miss Bodyguard lowered her head and looked at herself, then asked with an unperturbed tone, "What charm was it at the beginning?" "I bought a black ear at the gathering for 400 pounds. I was told that I could hear the voice of a great existence, and that if I was lucky enough, I would benefit greatly. If I was unlucky, I would die on the spot. Back then, I couldn't get a bodyguard, and since I was in such danger, I could only take the gamble." "The result was pretty good," Klein replied absolutely truthfully. "When I heard the voice of the great existence, that black ear shattered by itself and turned into such a charm." Miss Bodyguard's blue eyes swept over him slowly. The room was silent, as if it was frozen. Finally, The lady in the black regal dress nodded. You'd better find a psychiatrist. Do you mean that I've become a potential lunatic? Yes, she has guessed that it was a relic of a listener, and she understands that Rosego's spirituality must have been tainted by the true creator. She wouldn't suspect that I had deliberately made her sleep to take that opportunity to perform a mediumship. It would also explain why I had gotten rid of the effects of the ravings faster than she did. After all, I'm a potential lunatic created by the true creator. Klein smirked. Let's hurry up and clean up the scene. MI9 might come over to take a look. He pointed at Rosego's headless body. As he spoke, Klein put on a pair of gloves and squatted down to look for any relics. He quickly found more than 10 pounds in cash, some essential oils and herbal powder, 2 crudely cut paper figurines, and a strange piece of paper. This piece of paper was orange in color, and on it were symbols corresponding to the sun. The magic emblem formed a blank rectangle, and just by holding it in his hand, he found it very warm and sedate. What is this? Klein didn't hide his puzzlement. Without him realizing it, Miss Bodyguard was already floating behind him. She answered simply, a mystical object corresponding to a notary. Notary? Klein was surprised at first, but he soon remembered that Rosego was an intelligence officer in the Intis Republic. People there believed in the eternal blazing sun and the god of steam and machinery. Similarly, the eternal blazing sun was also the god of deeds. This is the sequence 6 or sequence 5 of the Bard pathway. If the notarization is valid, the Beyonder powers will be temporarily enhanced. If the notarization is fake, the Beyonder powers will be forcefully dispersed. Miss Bodyguard didn't explain any further and gave a rough description of its use. Klein was about to say something when he saw an eerie glow emitting out of Rosego's headless body in bloody brain mush. They attracted each other to form a blob that transformed into a black, pupilless eye. Then, what is this? Klein asked again, feigning ignorance. Something worthless. Miss Bodyguard maintained her way of speaking. Worthless? Klein asked with a frown. He actually understood what Miss Bodyguard meant. Normally, if Rosego eventually lost control, he would leave behind a strange and terrifying sealed artifact. If he didn't, his Beyonder characteristic could be used as the main ingredient of a Nimblewright master. In short, it would be of great value. However, the problem was that he hadn't lost control but was also tainted by the true creator. Hence, it had become a potion's main ingredient that was branded by an evil god. Using it to concoct a Nimblewright master potion was equivalent to committing suicide by ingesting poison. Miss Bodyguard looked at the entirely black eye and said in a low and ethereal voice. It has been contaminated by an evil god. It has no value anymore. If it really is of value, and one that's very valuable, I would even worry that you'd finish me off in passing. Klein pointed at Rosego's remains and said, these are our common spoils of war. We'll each pick a few. You first. Miss Bodyguard shot him a glance. Without a word, she floated over and took the notary document. Just like I thought. In the future, I should find and learn the knowledge in mysticism to remove an evil god's contamination. Klein took out an iron cigarette case and bent down to pick up the black eye. Chapter 252. As soon as Klein's fingers touched the black eye, he heard illusory sounds as a throbbing pain seared through his head. But, at the same time, something strange appeared in his vision. These were countless illusory black threads that spread out from Miss Bodyguard and his own body. They emanated from their bodies, out into the void toward some boundless distance. This was a scene that would horrify people with trypophobia. Klein suddenly gritted his teeth, unable to endure the corruptive feeling any longer as he placed the black eye into the iron cigarette case. Everything restored to normal, and the negative side effects he suffered subsided. Only then did Klein have the energy to make guesses. Is that the essence of a Nimblewright master's Beyonder powers? It allows one to see and control certain threads connecting every person's body and spirit. What a pity that it's contaminated. The side effects are too great, and it cannot be used as a mystical item. For now, disregarding an attempt to purify it above the grey fog, this will be considered the second time that I'm provoking the true creator, so it is very likely that he would prepare himself and seek me out. If that happened, I probably wouldn't have a chance of reviving again. I should learn and master the relevant knowledge before making a decision. Phew. He exhaled, and after Miss Bodyguard chose the crude paper figurines and the corresponding materials, he bent down again to pick up the 13 pounds 5 soldi and 8 pence. Then, looking at Rosego's headless body in the blood all over the floor, he said, with a slight headache, "Let's clean up the scene." The pale blonde Miss Bodyguard floated to the side and calmly said, "Let me do it." "You?" Klein stopped, puzzled and shocked, before turning his head. Miss Bodyguard floated to Rosego's side, crouched down, and went to lie down over the body. She slowly sank in and fused with the corpse. The fingers of Rosego's body twitched twice, and the blood, brain matter, and fragments around it flowed backward, forming a new head at the neck. However, the head was covered with countless cracks, just like a disgusting toy made from tiny fragments. It was like glass that had been shattered but didn't crumble immediately. There was still blood and brain matter flowing inside it, as well as the reflection of the bullet from the revolver. Klein couldn't help but take a step back, feeling that this was definitely one of the most terrifying forms in any ghost story. Rosego's corpse climbed to its feet, picked up the police cap, and half covered its face. The murder scene had been cleaned, leaving zero traces. Incomparable professionalism. Klein marveled in his heart. He watched as Miss Bodyguard steered the corpse to lumber to the door. He subconsciously warned her, "Don't take a carriage or walk in brightly lit places. It would frighten the carriage driver and other passers-by." Miss Bodyguard didn't stop, completely ignoring his words. Suddenly, Klein thought of something. He realized what he had overlooked as he quickly added, "On the way back, go to the Rice police station, Sergeant Faxine's home, or search around Minsk Street for the clothes Rosego was originally wearing." Rosego came wearing a police uniform, and the powers of a faceless were obviously limited to himself, so where were his previous clothes? He couldn't have been wearing a police uniform all night. If MI9 and the police found Rosego's clothes nearby and realized that I'm not hurt, things would be a little tricky. Miss Bodyguard is an expert that's not considered a legal beyonder. For a normal detective to pay £1,000 to hire a bodyguard is enough to arouse suspicion. Klein kept thinking, trying to seal all the loopholes ahead of time. Just as he was about to use his divination ability to help Miss Bodyguard find Rosego's old clothes and return the missing uniform, Rosego's corpse paused and replied in a rusty voice, "I know." She seems very confident. "Oh right, Miss Bodyguard's state is between the physical body and the spirit body, and the principle behind divination is to travel the spirit world with an astral projection. Thus, she can rely on her instincts to divine." Having realized this, Klein didn't say another word. He handed the cartridge case to Rosego's corpse and watched it open the door, walk out, and close the door politely. "The spoil of war that I chose is a beyonder characteristic contaminated by the true creator. I believe that no one would be able to divine it. Even if they did, they would feel the danger ahead of time and wouldn't dare to proceed with the divination." While thinking over the matter, Klein walked back to the sofa and sat down, feeling a lingering sense of fear. The battle had lasted no more than a minute, nor had it been fierce enough to destroy anything, but the ferocity and danger of it had been second only to what he had experienced when facing Megos and the baby in her womb. Even with the powerful Miss Bodyguard and the language of foulness, he had almost fallen under Rosego's control and killed without being able to put up a resistance. The ability of a Nimblewright master is very odd and very powerful. According to the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation, the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Rosego should include all of the main ingredients of the potion sequences 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. If it wasn't contaminated by an evil god, if it was matched with the supplementary ingredients, an ordinary person could instantly become a sequence 5 Beyonder. Of course, This kind of advancement method, one depending entirely on luck, has long been abandoned by history. It's the most primitive and most dangerous method. Advancing step by step according to the sequence is the best way that has been verified by the lives of countless predecessors. If I can get rid of the corruption of the true creator in the future, then I can also use the beyonder characteristic left behind by Rosago when advancing from sequence 6 to sequence 5. The additional characteristics will only make me stronger, like the captain. As Klein recalled the past, he raised his hand to pinch his forehead. He turned to think about something more important. Rosago's appearance meant that the struggle for the manuscript had ended. Could his lack of charms have to do with him finishing all his charms in the battle? To come at such a critical juncture, it's likely he had the intention of diverting attention. MI9 probably didn't expect him to seek revenge so boldly under such circumstances. They didn't send anyone to monitor me and could only passively wait for Rosago to give them the signal. Rosago was Bakerland's assistant, and his actions should be directed only by Bakerland. After his death, as long as Bakerland is dead, there would be no more latent dangers left. I wonder if the assassination has begun or if it succeeded. Tonight, because of the battle over Helmasuin's manuscript, the powers defending Bakerland would be at its weakest. If it were me, I'd definitely not miss this opportunity. I'm sure Bakerland didn't think that someone would assassinate him. With nothing to do, Klein fished out a coin and, recited with a suppressed tone, Bakerland is already dead. Ding! The penny tumbled in the air and fell down into the palm of Klein's hand, head facing up. It meant a positive result. Bakerland is dead. The assassination was a success. Klein was overjoyed, his tensed-up nerves immediately relaxed. Without Rosago's interference, he believed that the result was correct. This matter has finally ended. Klein took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He leaned back slowly on the sofa and looked out of the window at the faint crimson moon amid his fatigue and relief. Inside the Intis Republic's embassy, 2 military officials were squatting beside Bakerland's body, examining the cause of his death. Their partners and their superior had already gone out, chasing in a bid to capture the assassin. However, everyone knew that it was already too late. There was no hope left. There's severe lung damage, suspected to be the result of a disease. An extremely strong fatal blow, one much stronger than all the sequence 5 beyonder attacks I've ever seen. One of the military officials said in a low voice. Disease? On the floor and on the bed, there are obvious marks of flesh and blood magic on the ground and on the bed, but none on the wall. Besides, the commotion of the fight wasn't transmitted outside. Finally, with the lethal blow having the characteristics of corruption and obliteration, there are at least 4 unconnected beyonder powers. Another military official stood up and began to describe the situation as if he was talking to himself. He suddenly stopped and looked at the other military official. They said in unison, "Shepherd." After a few seconds of silence, the squatting military official frowned and said, "It might be a group with at least 4 different beyonders, then, we'll wait to be judged. It's normal for us not to discover the infiltration of a single rose bishop, but how did the other 3 do it? It's impossible." The standing military official denied the guess as he hesitantly said, "However, I have heard of another sequence that can create similar effects. I think it's called Scribe. I don't know what pathway it is, nor do I know which organization it belongs." The squatting military official nodded and said, "A shepherd is the prime suspect. The Aurora Order are a bunch of lunatics. It's nothing odd for them to do anything. Let's begin investigating the identity of the woman that seduced the ambassador. Damn it. The Lone Kingdom definitely won't permit our investigations. Those Aurora Order bastards are lunatics who deserve to be f***ed by donkeys." The standing military official shook his head in frustration. They were bound to be punished for the ambassador's assassination. At 15, Minsk Street, Klein pretended as though nothing had happened. Putting up with his fatigue, he flipped through the papers. After about 20 minutes, he suddenly saw Miss Bodyguard, in her black regal dress and long, pale blonde hair, appear in the oriel window. "Is it done?" Klein subconsciously asked. Miss Bodyguard nodded slightly without a word. "Phew." Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Thank you for your protection. This matter ends here. I'll pay you the remaining £900 in 2 days. As you know, there's a withdrawal limit. Or should I hand it over to Merrick?" The pale-faced lady opened and closed her mouth, her voice seemingly ethereal as it echoed in the air. "Just give it to me. I promise to protect you for 3 days, not just once. Lady, you really abide by the contract. However, this would be very inconvenient for me. Are you going with me to catch the adulterers in bed tomorrow?" 3 days. Today is Thursday, and the protection would be over by Sunday afternoon. Yes, thankfully, it wouldn't affect the tarot gathering. Klein rubbed his forehead and said, "All right. How should I address you?" "You don't need to know." Miss Bodyguard lifted her Gothic regal dress, bowed slightly, and disappeared from the oriel window. Chapter 253. She really has, quite the character. Klein smiled in response to Miss Bodyguard's reply, a very obvious smile. Yes, to be able to fend off Rosago, a Nimblewright master, for a short period of time to the extent of having a Sisa battle, she's most likely a Sequence 5 Beyonder. I wonder what sequence pathway she belongs to and what her potion name is. Her state is rather unique. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have even had the chance to use the language of foulness. Klein picked up the newspaper beside him and pretended to read, but he was actually thinking. However, he quickly turned his attention back to the issue of whether there were still loopholes on the matter. For example, the contaminated Beyonder characteristic left behind by Rosago had an intense luster of spirituality. It was very likely that it couldn't be concealed by the iron cigarette case alone, so it would be exposed under the prying eyes of others using spirit vision. Klein secretly activated his spirit vision and looked down at his pocket. He could see faint colorful lusters emanating from within the iron cigarette case, but it wasn't obvious and was rather thin. This was mixed with the color of his own aura, making it difficult to distinguish or detect it. That's right. Only a high-sequence Beyonder can identify it through 2 levels of interference. No wonder all kinds of materials like herbal powders and the corresponding essential oil extracts are kept in metal bottles and not wooden vessels. It's because they contain spirituality, and those with better spirit vision can see through wood and see the color of the auras. Klein suddenly understood some of the important details in mysticism. In the past, he did things according to the rules without considering the reasons behind them, but now, he understood the underlying reason behind the rules. After repeatedly checking and ensuring that everything was in order, Klein put down the newspapers and walked to the 2nd floor. He had originally planned to take off his clothes and take a bath to completely relax himself, but when he thought of how Miss Bodyguard could appear out of nowhere in his house, he felt a little uneasy. Therefore, he only washed his face, brushed his teeth, and soaked his feet in hot water. Returning to his bedroom and taking off his coat, Klein hid his belongings before he collapsed onto the bed. As he was exhausted and had held on for quite a while, he ended up with tense nerves that prevented him from quickly falling asleep. Opening his eyes to look at the crimson moonlight on the ceiling, Klein didn't attempt to sleep with the help of cogitation. Instead, he aimlessly unfurled his thoughts, as if he were riding a horse without pulling at the reins. As his thoughts wandered, he quickly noticed a problem, having encountered too many coincidences in Tingen City and later learning how it was related to sealed artifact 0-08. My second case after arriving at Backlund allowed me to get the next 3 potions formulas. Is that too much of a coincidence? Although this is in line with the revelation from my divination, Backlund contains the opportunities for me to become powerful. Isn't it too fast and simple? Simple doesn't refer to the difficulty, but rather to the degree of twists and turns in the matter. This matter was very difficult and dangerous, but it wasn't complex and appeared simple. According to my expectations, I would have gathered information regarding the secret order through Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, and Miss Zio and her companion, and then I would catch the tail of this ancient organization. After numerous twists and turns, would eventually obtain the formulas, and that would have taken at least 3 months. Who knew that I would have succeeded in less than 3 weeks? It can't be that it was arranged by someone again, right? Yes. Let me think through the circumstances again. It's no coincidence that the Intis Republic is related to the secret order. Emperor Rosel's diary has confirmed this circumstantially. The abilities of the Seer and Faceless are very suited for an intelligence organization. For a mid-sequence beyonder of a similar pathway to become the assistant of an intelligence czar like Bakerland is reasonable and normal. That's not a coincidence. The reason that the ambassador sent someone to take revenge on me likely has to do with him wanting to divert attention. Then, sending Rosago, who can most easily succeed and escape, is a choice with reduced risk. That's not surprising at all. It was quite normal for Ian to look for new detectives in the papers after none of the detectives he knew were willing to accept his mission of tracking down Zriel. There weren't many new detectives advertising on the papers at the time, and I was probably the only one. Well, I was the only one on the Backland Bulletin, just like what I've concluded previously. The problem with Massault was that he was too rash, and I was worried that it's not easy to disguise myself usually as it can end up attracting more attention. Therefore, I didn't try to disguise myself. Although these two possibilities, especially the former, has the probability of being influenced, it does match the corresponding person's personality, mentality, and origins. And this isn't the main point. This doesn't explain the problem of how my second case ended up involving a mid-sequence beyonder of the Seer pathway. It was destined by fate. That doesn't feel right. Thinking ahead, after I transmigrated, the first and second case I found myself embroiled in was related to the Seer pathway. Of course, it could be explained as an arrangement by 0-08. Right, the Antigonus family's notebook even corrupted the misfortune cloth puppet and showed me the complicated vertical I symbol that involves the Antigonus family's treasure. The reason I came up with back then was that with the termination of the Antigonus family's bloodline, it viewed me, a seer who had survived despite having interacted with it, as its inheritor. Now that I think about it, this reason is extremely trifling. What if I'm a devout believer of the Evernight goddess? However, I only made a guess at that time and didn't confirm it. The Antigonus family's treasure is obviously related to the Seer pathway. Thinking deeper, why did I transmigrate? Why did I happen to possess Klein's body, and not anyone else? Back then, Klein had just proceeded with dark divination and was made to commit suicide by the Antigonus family's notebook. And that notebook is clearly related to the Seer pathway. In addition, the first time I saw Rosel's diary, it had content that involved his regret of not choosing apprentice, marauder, or seer. That was very coincidental. From beginning to end, except for those parts involving 0-08, everything appeared to be in a mess. It doesn't seem like a conscious arrangement, but more like a kind of passive attraction, a mutual attraction, an attraction that has breaks between them. I attract things and items regarding the Seer pathway, and at the same time, I'm attracted to them. It does seem odd thinking about it. This kind of attraction even directly influences fate, preventing even Mr. Isaac from seeing through it. Is there some strange characteristic to me? And this characteristic allows me to resurrect a limited number of times. With this in mind, Klein suddenly had the impulse to go above the grey fog to perform a divination and confirm his ideas. But he quickly rejected this idea, not only because Miss Bodyguard might be watching in the mirror, but also because he believed that his greatest characteristic was the mysterious space above the grey fog. Therefore, it was obviously impossible for him to have an answer if he were to use it to divine about it. At least for now, there aren't any obvious signs of manipulation. It would be acceptable if it's just pure attraction. And I've already chosen a beyonder pathway, that cannot be changed until sequence 4, so I can only take things one step at a time. Right, I should be firm about not heading to the Hornacis mountain range to seek out the Antigonus family's treasure. Heh, I have a feeling that I would say how nice it is in the future when I actually do it. Klein silently made a self-deprecating remark as he felt his exhaustion gradually wash over him. His eyelids couldn't help but close. The last thought before he fell asleep was, I should participate in more Beyonder gatherings and gather the corresponding Beyonder ingredients for magician through Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, and the Sun. I wouldn't reject anything for Faceless if they were available. In addition, I should obtain mystical items that have less severe negative effects. Before my digestion and increase in strength, it's best to have more life preservation abilities. Apart from this, investing, taking on jobs, saving up money, and attempts to look for Lenivis to use him as the starting point for my revenge, can also be considered a form of practice. Those were Klein's future plans. At 7 in the morning, he woke up as usual. It was still gloomy and hazy outside. Klein got up and walked to the door. As he passed by the full-length mirror, he saw that Miss Bodyguard had suddenly appeared. She wore the same black bonnet, her face was as pale as ever. Her voice pierced through the glass and slipped into Klein's ear in an ethereal fashion. Someone from MI9 came last night. I should say as expected, the police came late, but I still have to thank them for being late. Klein smiled and asked, they didn't find anything, right? In regards to the answer, he was very certain that if MI9 had discovered something, he wouldn't have been able to sleep undisturbed. No. Miss Bodyguard's figure faded and disappeared into the mirror. This ability of hers is very powerful. Even spirit vision can't detect her. Perhaps, she can be seen with Rosego's Beyonder characteristic. Find Miss Bodyguard through those hidden threads. Klein's mind stirred as he returned to the bed and took out the iron cigarette case from under his pillow. Just as he touched it, before he could even open it, a bone-piercing cold rushed at his neck. He felt his hairs stand on end, and his entire body trembled. Pow! His hand loosened and the iron cigarette case fell to the ground. This is a warning from Miss Bodyguard. Klein laughed dryly, pretending as though nothing had happened as he stuffed the iron cigarette case into his pocket. After washing up and putting on his clothes, he arrived at the first floor and took out the newspapers that he had subscribed to from his letterbox. Flipping open the Tussock Times, Klein saw the headline, Intis Ambassador to Backland murdered. Terrorist organization, the Aurora Order, claims responsibility. The result is out so quickly. Besides, the Aurora Order had only accepted a job, so why would they claim responsibility? Yes. A terrorist organization needs to show off their stature and build up their image. Only then would they be able to attract enough fresh blood. This complements their secret preachings. Mr. A is very good. He should be a shepherd. Klein stood in the hallway, reading the news. According to the news, there was evidence of the Aurora Order's assault on Ambassador Bakerland. In the follow-up investigation, they found a letter deliberately left behind by the Aurora Order which claimed responsibility for it. At the end of the news, the reporter briefly introduced the Aurora Order and listed some of the illegal crimes that they had committed. Their fame instantly surpassed most of the secret organizations. Regardless, this matter had come to an end. Klein exhaled, turned his head to look out the window, and he saw a thin mist filling the air as a drizzle began pattering down. Shouldn't there be bright sunshine and sunny weather during such moments? Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. And now, he had to go out to catch some adulterers. Chapter 254 In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Count Hall. Audrey, with a white napkin covering her, watched as the dining maidservant cut her a piece of bacon, laid out 2 fully fried eggs, spread fruit jam on a piece of soft bread, and added sauce to some grilled mushrooms. In a true noble family, maidservants were divided into many categories. Apart from personal maids, there were maids for the different bedrooms, study room maids, activity room maids, guest room maids, dressing maids, shoe maids, jewelry maids, dining maids, laundry maids, and kitchen maids. They were strictly assigned to their own tasks, with one task handled by one maid. Although this was a great waste of manpower, for nobles, propriety was everything. Unless there was a large amount of debt, they would never reduce their requirements in such matters. Audrey took a sip of the brownish-red tea, allowing the faint scent of malt and rose slush in her mouth. At this moment, she heard her father, a member of Parliament of the House of Lords, the powerful banker, Count Hall, mumbling as he held a newspaper in his hands. The Aurora Order is really crazy. Aurora Order? Audrey blinked and asked curiously, what did they do? Oh, baby, you don't want to know. They assassinated the Intis ambassador, Bakerland. It does them no good. Count Hall shook his head as he flipped through the newspaper. Audrey's elder brother, the Count's eldest son, Hibbert Hall swallowed the grilled mushrooms in his mouth and expressed his opinion. Perhaps they want to destroy the relationship between the kingdom and Intis and let the war spread from the colonies to the northern continent. This child of noble birth had a handsome face and bright golden hair. He looked like a classical sculpture, regardless of which angle one viewed him from. No, if that was the case, then they wouldn't leave behind so much obvious evidence. Moreover, recently, the kingdom has too many new policies that will be implemented and will need some time to stabilize the environment, so we won't rashly start a war. What happened last night was already reported in the newspaper this morning, and the details of the events and the murderer are enough to explain the thoughts of His Majesty and the ministers. Count Hall directed his son. Audrey listened to her father and brother discuss the matter in a daze before realizing what had happened. Bakerland has been assassinated. Mr. A succeeded. He really is from the Aurora Order. The reason why he intentionally exposed that it was the Aurora Order who did it was to prove that he was the one who completed the task and that he hadn't cheated me out of my money. This is too fast and efficient. I only paid the first sum yesterday afternoon, and I'm hearing the result this morning. A good result. Audrey was astonished and delighted. It was an uncontrollable joy, but also an instinctive fear. It was definitely something to be happy about since the mission entrusted by Mr. Fool's Adorer had been accomplished so easily. However, the power and actions displayed by Mr. A and the Aurora Order who was backing him left Audrey subconsciously scared. Thankfully, I talked with Glaint yesterday and reached a loan agreement. As a Viscount, he should have successfully raised the money without drawing attention to himself. I'll give Mr. The remaining funds in the coming 2 days through Zio and Furs. I can't afford to show my face. I won't be attending Mr. A's gathering for the next month or two. It's good that I already have other circles. Audrey took a reserved bite of the soft bread which was slathered with jam. As breakfast drew to a close, small cakes of cream, cherries, and strawberries were served to her plate, and she suddenly felt a little smug as she calmed down. Mr. Hanged Man wanted to take part in the mission, but he might have only just now completed his initial assignment, but it's already over. Serves him right to be at sea. Audrey was in a good mood, and she was smiling as she savored the dessert. At Hillston Borough, Zio and Furs looked at the newspaper in front of them and made no further movements for a long time. This was done by Mr. A, wasn't it? Zio looked at her friend with a shocked and puzzled look. Furs turned the stone bracelet on her wrist and shook her head in a daze. Perhaps. I know about the Aurora Order, but I don't know if Mr. A is a member of the Aurora Order. He should be. After all, we only gave him £2,000 yesterday. I doubt anyone else would also want to assassinate Ambassador Bakerland. Zio said with uncertainty. Furs was silent for a few seconds before she suddenly sighed and said, whether it was Mr. A or not, we still have to give him the remaining £8,000. At the moment, no one can prove that he didn't do it. If we want to stay in this circle, we can't renege on the debt. Anyway, we're not the ones paying. And we'll still get £500 for the work. With that, Zio became happy. The thing is, I always have a feeling that finding Mr. A again would be dangerous. Furs pondered and said, I'll go by myself to make the last payment. It'll be better for the both of us. But Zio was a little worried. If you follow me, it'll affect my escape. Furs shook the bracelet on her wrist and said in a disdainful tone. All right then, Zio scratched her short, rough blonde hair as she helplessly replied. While the two of them were fretting about this, a new message from Mr. A came to them from a private communication channel. He told them not to look for him, but to deposit the rest of the money in separate anonymous accounts at different banks. Phew! Zio and Furs breathed a sigh of relief in unison. In a basement that was as wide as a temple, Mr. A, wearing a hooded black robe, was kneeling in the darkness, murmuring something reverently. In front of him was a 3-meter statue of a man hanging upside down with his legs chained up. This hanged man had a giant's unique single vertical eye, and his arms were stretched out horizontally, forming a cross. At this moment, a man with a black robe came in and humbly reported, Mr. A, I've already sent the news. Well done, Mr. A said, without turning his head. The man in the black robe asked curiously, why don't you let us investigate who commissioned this mission? Mr. A lowered his head and said with an indifferent tone, there's no need. You must remember that this is a critical moment. We will cause chaos throughout the continent, try our best to attract the attention of others, and use these to welcome the return of our Lord. Ha ha ha. Cough. Cough. Cough, Mr. A suddenly laughed before he started having a fit of coughing. It was so serious that he fell to the ground. Cough. Cough. He coughed out blood-colored fragments which continued squirming after falling to the ground as if they were alive. The man in the black robe immediately lowered his head, pretending as though he had seen nothing. After quite some time, Mr. A finally calmed down. He crawled forward, his mouth pressed against the ground as he licked all the blood-colored fragments that he had coughed out back into his mouth. 126 New Year's Street, Hillston Borough. The relaxed Klein didn't tail Daraga Gale this time. Instead, he chose his mistress, Erica Taylor. After all, adultery needed two to clap. The pretty blonde, with the intricate makeup, arrived early at the Quelag Club via a rental carriage. Klein, who carried a suitcase containing a portable camera and all sorts of disguises, followed her in. Are there any more rooms to rest in? Wearing the club's frost badge on his chest, he asked the elegant maid responsible for receiving guests today. The maid wearing a black and white dress politely smiled. Yes, please follow the attendant upstairs. Klein nodded slightly. He followed the red-vested attendant up the stairs and arrived at the second floor, just in time to see Erica Taylor enter a lounge that faced the streets. Do you want to see the passers-by on the street or the tennis court out back? The red-vested attendant asked politely. Let's do the street, Klein answered casually in a deliberate manner. Under the arrangements of the red-vested attendant, he and Erica Taylor's room was separated by 2 rooms, and he could also see the street outside the club. How do I take a picture later? Should I find a chance to sneak in and hide in the room, or climb out of the window and travel across the pipes? Neither of these methods can conceal that exaggerated flash, but the latter can be disguised as a vogue shot from the outside. That wouldn't bring suspicion to me and I wouldn't be kicked out. However, this will be easily noticed by Daragu and Erica. Use a charm to put them to sleep. No, it wouldn't be convincing enough, it has to be a picture of them doing the deed. There's only one chance, and I have to take it well enough. This isn't my field of expertise, as I'm not some artistic master. If it was old Neil, he would definitely attempt to conjure a new ritualistic magic to hide the camera flash. Of course, the goddess might not respond to his request. As Klein considered his next move, he saw the image of Miss Bodyguard appear in a silver mirror in the room. She was still wearing her black Gothic regal dress and her matching soft hat. Her hair was pale blonde in color with delicate features across her pale face. "Do you have any way of hiding the flash of the camera?" Klein asked casually. Before he could finish his sentence, he saw ripples on the surface of the silver mirror as a slightly transparent palm suddenly extended. Miss Bodyguard came out of the silver mirror like a ghost, walked in front of Klein, and said with a nod, "Yes." She lowered her body and leaned over, slowly fusing into the camera's lens. Klein's mouth slightly opened as he watched this horrifying scene, taking quite a while to recover from his shock. He picked up his portable camera and tried a test shot in his lounge. The effect was beyond his expectations. The flash was limited to the vicinity of the camera, and the resulting image was also quite good. Perhaps it should now be called a spectral camera. Klein lampooned. He took the camera, went to the window, and patiently waited. Not long after, he saw Daragu Gale arrive via carriage. In the other room, Erica Taylor saw her lover and hastily left the lounge to meet him on the first floor. Klein seized the opportunity to use a tarot card to open her room, carefully hiding in the cupboard where the extra sheets and quilts were kept. The darkness around him reminded him of the previous night, of that creepy and terrifying Numblerite master, Rosago. Last night was filled with danger, yet today, here I am catching adulterers in the act. Life sure is marvelous. While Klein was making fun of himself, he heard the door open. Chapter 255. Huddled in the cupboard, Klein secretly activated his spirit vision and saw two interfering auras enter. "Erica, I brought you a present," a deep voice sounded as the door closed. As expected, he's a gentleman of the Lone Kingdom. Even in an affair, he seems a little old-fashioned. If it was a man from Intis, he would definitely be shouting, "Sweetheart, baby, angel," and the like. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. Of course, this was based on the stereotypes from newspapers, magazines, and novels. Erica Taylor asked in surprise, "Let me guess. Is it Fassman eye cream, face cream, or essence? Or Lashini's? What the heck are all those?" Klein was stunned by what he heard. It was clear that Daragu Gale wasn't able to react in time either. It took him about 8 seconds before he said, "No, stockings." In this world, since oil hasn't been discovered, there were no corresponding cheap chemical products, therefore, silk stockings were considered high-class items. "Not bad, let me take a look." Erica's joy didn't diminish. "I bought them yesterday at Phillips. 1 pair for 30 soli, a total of 5 pairs, Daragu said in a flaunting tone. "How expensive?" "That's expensive." Erica and Klein both said the same thing, one exclaiming, the other secretly sighing. Benson has worked for so many years, earning only £1 10 soli a week, which is 30 soli. That's just equivalent to a pair of stockings, and with that salary, he was able to provide his brother and sister with an education, feed them fairly well, and even provided them with a place to sleep. An average worker with a bit of skill would only be paid around 20 soli a week. Klein's clicked his tongue. "No, it's not expensive. Silk stockings are worth that much. I even gave an extra tip of 5 soli." As he spoke, the color of his aura turned more vivid, and Klein guessed that he had taken off his coat. "Then I'll give it a try," Erica Taylor softly said in a suggestive manner. "I feel like I'm watching a porno again. And it's even a live broadcast. Besides, Miss Bodyguard is also here." The corner of Klein's mouth twitched as he watched red colors flowing across red colors, signifying the passion between the two was igniting like fire. The purple color is almost red and isn't stopping. Red wrapped around green, orange. While listening to the wheezing and the low laughter, Klein judged the movements and positions of the couple outside by the change in the color of their auras. Feeling that this was enough, Klein silently pushed open the cupboard door and looked in the direction of the bed. Daragu and Erica were already entangled, their clothes half undone, their movements intense. Klein lifted the spectral camera and aimed it at the passionate couple, waiting to see their faces at the same time. As Daragu and Erica fell back onto the bed, Klein finally captured the most appropriate frame and pressed the shutter button. The click of the camera wasn't distinct, and the intense flash and other abnormalities were limited to a very small area, so the couple wasn't alarmed. With no confidence in his photography skills, Klein added a few more shots, intending to have options to choose from later. He was only planning on handing his employer a single picture because too many photos would make the lawyer suspect why the couple didn't notice him taking the picture. A piece of underwear landed lightly on the floor, and the sound of breathing intensified as Klein grabbed his portable camera and adeptly rolled out of the cupboard, closing the door behind him. He rolled on the floor until he reached the lounge's door. Then, he quietly pulled it open and returned to the corridor. Done. With a sigh of relief, Klein politely closed the door in silence, pressed his hand to his chest, and bowed in the direction of the bed. Without further ado, he returned to his lounge. The last £7 will soon be obtained. And I also earned an additional Quelag Club membership worth £50. It covers board, lodging, and entertainment. That's worth even more than £50. Without any connections or contacts, I wouldn't have been able to join this, even with £100. This mission isn't bad at all. It's simple, safe, and profitable. Klein put down his portable camera and sighed with emotion in his heart. At that moment, a hand suddenly stretched out from the camera lens. Miss Bodyguard in her black regal dress slowly came out and floated in midair again, but her face remained pale. Thinking of how he had led her to watch some porno, Klein tried to change the topic, in embarrassment. I plan on heading to the cafeteria to eat something. Do you want to come with me? Each member could bring one guest. As for how to explain the sudden appearance of the guest, Klein's plan was to go out for a while and then come back. Miss Bodyguard replied in a neutral tone, I can go without eating for 2 weeks. As she spoke, she turned her back to Klein and floated toward the mirror, disappearing in an instant. What exactly is her sequence? Klein thought curiously, putting the portable camera back in its case. After doing all of this, he went to the bathroom and relieved himself. After washing his hands and wiping his face, Klein looked into the mirror and examined his appearance. As he hadn't shaved this morning, he had quite a stubble. His hair was parted to the sides in a 3:7 ratio, and a pair of gold-rimmed glasses hung on his face. He looked refined and scholarly, with a tinge of maturity. There's a definite difference from the past. I can still be recognized if scrutinized. Once my beard grows to a certain extent, I wouldn't have to worry that much. I wouldn't need to be afraid of anything when I advance to sequence 6 faceless. Klein took out his golden pocket watch, opened it, and walked out of the bathroom. He took his suitcase and went to the cafeteria on the first floor. It was just after 9, so breakfast was still served. Klein chose a double-sided, half-cooked fried egg, a loaf of white bread, a cake of butter, a desi pie, a serving of bacon, and a cup of Marquis black tea with a piece of lemon floating on its surface. While looking for a seat, he suddenly saw a familiar face. It was the surgeon who had recommended him to the club, Aaron Series. The tall, thin gentleman was sitting alone in the corner, having finished his breakfast and was sipping his coffee as he leafed through the newspaper. Good morning, Dr. Series. Klein walked over and greeted the slightly cold Aaron. The surgeon nudged the frame over his nose and said, Just call me Aaron, Detective Moriarty. According to the principle of reciprocity, you have to call me Sherlock. Klein sat down. Any news today? I came out in such a hurry that I haven't read the newspapers. The Intis ambassador was assassinated. A terrorist organization by the name of the Aurora Order declared responsibility for it. Sigh, this world is becoming more and more chaotic. Sooner or later, there will be an all-out war in the southern and northern continent, Aaron expressed his feelings. The war has never stopped, sir, it's just that we've been able to enjoy peace, Klein finished his fried egg and replied with a smile. What a pity that such an important case wouldn't seek the help of private detectives like us. Aaron flipped through the newspaper. This news doesn't have much to do with us. What's really important is that the House of Lords and the House of Commons will pass a motion either today or tomorrow after a long debate. First, it's the Civil Servant Unified Examination Bill, as well as the relevant guidance and actual plans. Second, is the establishment of the Atmospheric Pollution Council, and third, the establishment of the Independent Alkaline Industry Inspector. The latter two involve pollution. God, they're finally paying attention to this problem. The patients in the hospital with pulmonary attacks have been rising constantly. Has it finally been passed? I wonder how Benson's preparations are. Will it be affected by my death? Klein's smile suddenly beamed. That's good news. To Mary, this is extremely good news. She wishes to make herself or her husband, Duragu, become one of the members of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council. She has a higher chance since she doesn't hold any positions in a commercial company and is a devotee of the goddess. Besides, in any organization, there's ultimately a need for balance. Aaron mentioned Klein's employer. I suggested to her that she should frequent the club since we have quite a number of House of Commons members of Parliament as club members. In the Lone Kingdom, the members of Parliament of the House of Commons were mainly composed of wealthy people and the representatives of certain nobles. However, there were also many professionals, such as doctors, lawyers, priests, teachers, scientists, and accountants. The Quelag Club targeted a variety of professionals in the middle class, without distinguishing between them by their political inclinations. Klein didn't know much about such things, so he just said a few words in response before changing the subject. Aaron, it's Friday today. Don't you need to head back to the hospital? No, I'm on leave. It's been terrible lately. Aaron suddenly frowned. What happened? Klein drank a mouthful of black tea. Since Bakerland had just been assassinated, and Rosego's body had been thrown into a sewer far away, he didn't know when it would be found. Klein was concerned about the aftereffects and the imperfection of his disguise, so he didn't plan on taking missions that were too difficult or easily exposed his identity. Therefore, he was interested in simple matters which held potential and handsome rewards. Aaron put down the newspaper and sighed. I've been very unlucky recently. I've had a few consecutive failed surgeries. Fortunately, there were no serious consequences. Otherwise, my license would have been revoked. Although it wasn't big news for surgeons to cause deaths in the present era since it was common, the penalties were still quite severe if a serious accident occurred due to a surgeon's negligence. Well, I can't help much. Well, actually, I know of a luck enhancement ritual, but its effect is to send you above a gray fog. Klein lowered his head and began to nibble at his bread. After breakfast, he said goodbye to Aaron, went to withdraw £500 in cash, and gave £300 to Miss Bodyguard before returning home. While waiting for the photos to develop, he hoped for a simple job to be entrusted to him. Unfortunately, none of them came to him. In the evening, Klein prepared to head out again, his target, Braveheart's bar. Taking the opportunity of having Miss Bodyguard around, he hoped to get in touch with more Beyonder circles. Chapter 256. Before leaving the house, Klein tossed a coin to inquire if it was beneficial for him to visit the Braveheart's bar that day. After receiving a negative result, he looked around before whispering into the air, "Is someone monitoring me today?" After a few seconds of silence, Miss Bodyguard's ethereal voice suddenly sounded from behind him. No. Klein subconsciously looked back, but he failed to find Miss Bodyguard. His attention quickly returned to the answer he received as he couldn't help but let out a snicker in his heart. MI9 isn't even putting me on their suspect list at all. After confirming that Rosego hadn't sought me out, they completely put me aside. Should I feel honored or insulted? It's true that a detective that busies himself looking for cats has no way of being associated with the assassination of an ambassador or getting rid of a Sequence 5 expert. Furthermore, MI9 has been monitoring me for quite some time. My panic, my helplessness, and my struggle for self-preservation were laid out for them to see. It's obvious that I can't inflict any substantial harm to the ambassador. With that in mind, Klein put on his half-top hat, carried his black silver-inlaid cane, and walked out of 15, Minsk Street. He spent 2 solely for a rental carriage that brought him to Braveheart's bar on Iron Gate Street in the Backlund Bridge area. He entered like a regular, walked past the cheering drunkards around the boxing ring, and rapped the countertop when he came to the bar counter. 1 glass of Southville beer. The bartender looked up at him and mumbled, "Casper's is in card room 3. Klein smiled and pushed 5 one-penny copper coins to the man. Then, carrying the wooden cup and sipping a white, smooth, frothy Southville beer, he walked around 2 of the rowdiest, liveliest stages that stank the most and knocked on the door of card room 3. Casper's was playing Texas poker with unlimited stakes. Stacks of cash were piled high in front of him, as well as yellow coins that piled up in a dazzling heap. Noticing Klein's gaze, the black market arms dealer with the huge scar on his face twitched his big red nose and casually said, "I don't like using chips as they don't feel real to me. It's still the texture of cash and the weight of the coins that leaves me intoxicated. It the same as F*** king women." After finishing that sentence, Casper's frowned slightly. "What are you doing here again?" Klein didn't answer directly, but he gestured with his mouth to speak outside. "Damn it. I was going to clean them up with this hand." "Bullshit, I'm folding." Casper's tossed the 2 cards in front of him into the middle of the table, then he limped to the door and said to Klein, "You'd better have a good reason." After leaving the card room and coming to the corner, Klein said in a suppressed voice, "I want to know when the most recent gathering will be, just like the last one." Casper's looked at him suspiciously. "Haven't you struck a deal with Merrick? It's not about hiring bodyguards. Regarding that, you know. I've become very interested in it." Klein was telling the truth. Casper's hesitated and then said, "There will be a gathering tonight. The organizer is the same person as last time, but you'll have to wait for more than half an hour. I'll inform them first. You showed your reputation last time, so I don't think there'll be too much of a problem." "No problem, I'll pay you." Klein touched the bills in his pocket. "You just need to pay £1 this time." Casper's acted like he was very generous. "It's worth it," Klein said as the corners of his lips curled up. After paying Casper's, he found a seat and sat down, drinking the rich malt-scented Southville beer and enjoying the competition on the ring. "I can beat and take them down at the same time." Klein quickly came to this conclusion. After about 10 minutes, Casper's returned to the bar, looked around, and said in a low voice, "They agreed. We'll head there after half an hour. Holy Lord of Storms, I hope you haven't forgotten that mask." Klein gave a positive answer. He slowed down his drinking as he began sipping, and he took half an hour to finish the 500 milliliters of Southville beer. It was the same path they took as the previous time, and it was the same house without any light. Klein put on the iron mask that only covered half of his face, and he watched as Casper's knocked on the door rhythmically. The rhythm is different from last time. The knocking changes all the time. Klein listened carefully for a moment, then saw the small plank of the door open and a pair of eyes peer out. After the indistinguishable process like before, he put on the hooded robe and hid his entire face in the shadows. It was still the same living room, with a candle flickering in the dim light. Klein randomly found a seat and quietly sat down. But unlike before, he no longer felt suppressed or tensed. Instead, he leisurely looked around. The cold wind that blew across the back of his neck made him certain that Miss Bodyguard had followed him in without anyone noticing. As expected, there are no Sequence 5 experts in this gathering. There might not even be a Sequence 6. Klein thought. After listening in on the conversation for a while, he saw the round-faced apothecary change his posture as if he wanted to speak. As expected, the apothecary who had half his chubby face exposed quickly raised his hand and said, Black Snake has apparently died in the sewers, those beasts are still rampant. Black Snake died? Klein was surprised to hear the news. Black Snake was the man who had sold him the remains of a listener, allowing him to, successfully, create the language of foulness. It was suspected that he was from the Aurora Order. His strength wasn't low at all, yet, he actually died performing the simple mission of clearing the beasts in the sewers. Klein frowned suspiciously. He suddenly thought of something. When he discovered Zreel's corpse, he had heard thumping sounds deep in the sewers. By the time he led Ian there, parts of Zreel's body had been eaten by strange beasts. That was at the bottom of Iron Carbon Street in the East Borough, quite far from the Backlund Bridge area, and I wonder if there's a connection. Klein had no impulse to verify this. News of Black Snake's death quickly spread through the dark room, attracting the murmurs of many. A sense of fear spread through them, as though they had experienced it themselves. The apothecary clapped his hands and said, "So, what should I do?" The whispers suddenly disappeared, and a frozen silence filled the room. As the apothecary had advised him without being afraid of offending him, Klein thought for a moment and said, "If I were you, I would give up on the rest of the herbs and never go there again." "Why?" "They'll mature very soon, and those beasts that hide in the depths of the sewers usually won't come out," the apothecary asked hesitantly. Klein deliberately said in a hoarse voice, "Black Snake likely has an organization backing him. His death definitely would have caused an investigation. I believe you don't want to interact with them, right?" Having the remains of a listener didn't imply that Black Snake was an Aurora Order member. By referring to the true creator as a great being, this was confirmed. Moreover, he would rather believe that this was the case rather than hope for a fluke. "Yeah." The apothecary nodded slightly, seemingly having made up his mind. Klein added, "If I were you, I would even anonymously report this matter to the police." "What?" many gathering members exclaimed. Klein explained without a change in tone, "Since the beasts in the sewers can kill Black Snake, it means that they're very dangerous. And since everyone lives in Backlund, if it really causes a major catastrophe, it's hard to guarantee that we won't be implicated. That's why the best option is to attract the attention of the police and let the officials handle this matter. We can enjoy a good outcome without any risks. Isn't that nice?" Just as he finished his sentence, the old gentleman, Eye of Wisdom, applauded. "Such a great idea. We're afraid of the official Beyonders, but similarly, we can make use of them. We don't have to handle everything on our own. That's because I was an official Beyonder, so my train of thought would definitely be different from pure savages like you." Klein smiled as he lampooned. After speaking, he became a bystander again, listening to people peddling or requesting for items. As he watched the deals which succeeded or failed, he found nothing of interest. He temporarily didn't announce the Beyonder ingredients he needed, planning to observe the circle of Beyonders a few more times. Seconds turned to minutes and finally, Eye of Wisdom arranged for people to leave every 3 minutes. Klein was the first to leave the previous time, so he didn't know what happened next. Now, he noticed that there were at least 5 exits. The attendants of the Eye of Wisdom would lead different people to different passages, trying their best to space them out and drag out time. After more than half an hour, there were only 3 members of the gathering left. Apart from Eye of Wisdom, the other 2 were Klein and the suspected apothecary. Eye of Wisdom looked at Klein and laughed with his aged voice. "Looks like you're quite lucky." He recognized me as the man who had bought the ominous item from Black Snake. Klein smiled. "Yes, my bet paid off." Hearing their conversation, the apothecary widened his eyes as he examined Klein. After a long time, he finally said, "Do you have another mystical charm that affects luck? I already regarded you as a dead person." "You're so direct." Klein tactfully answered, "Maybe I'm lucky enough myself." Actually, he did want such an item. Eye of Wisdom sighed and said, "Young lad, don't always bet on your luck, especially on matters such as this. Even if you've won many times in the past, just one loss would doom you for eternity. I know. That's why I've come to this gathering to see if I can buy any useful items. Heh, I can be considered the same as all of you now, Klein said, seemingly casual. Same. The apothecary gave an exaggerated sigh. I should have listened to my teacher. Teacher. He seems to be a suspected apothecary. The apothecary pathway is controlled by the Church of Mother Earth and the Life School of Thought. The Life School of Thought passes down their teachings through mentoring. Klein's heart skipped a beat and asked curiously, why do you say that? The apothecary sighed and said, my teacher told me to choose a path that would make one sufficiently lucky, but in the end, I still became a medicine concoctor. As a result, I haven't been able to find the next batch of potion ingredients for this sequence for a whole 2 years. I'm envious of your luck. Make one sufficiently lucky. This is very similar to the sequence pathway for Monster. He really is from the Life School of Thought. Klein smiled and said, what's your reason for choosing it? The apothecary suddenly straightened his back and said, this is a man's choice. After knowing that I can concoct medicine to enhance my ability in that field, I chose this path without hesitation. Chapter 257. What a godlike reason. After hearing the apothecary's answer, Klein was unable to control the changes in his expression despite being a clown. Fortunately, he was wearing an iron mask over his face. The apothecary didn't notice the reactions Klein and Eye of Wisdom had, and he began to let his hair down. That's why I really like Backlund. There are a lot of prostitutes prowling the streets, hanging outside music halls, theaters, waiting in the streets and alleys. They're either professionals or working part-time. They were originally maidservants or workers, each with different flavors. It's said that in places in the West Borough, bankrupt aristocratic ladies might occasionally appear. That's really something to look forward to. Klein nudged the iron mask that covered his face upwards and quickly changed the topic. Did your teacher have any objections to your choice? The apothecary shook his head slightly. No, he just kicked me out of the damn door after teaching me all the knowledge in the field of herbs, telling me to roam the world and experience life. Damn it, he didn't even tell me where to find the next potion ingredients. At this point, the apothecary looked at Klein and added, if you know where to obtain Spring of the Elves marrow crystals, please do tell me. I'll pay you for it. Of course, you can also first buy it and then sell it to me for a higher price. You're a lucky guy. Who knows, you might help fulfill my wish. Alright, Klein casually agreed. He then asked, thoughtfully, when that happens, can I use it to exchange for the potion formula for apothecary? From his point of view, an apothecary was very useful as support. He could use it to groom helpers. The apothecary, who wasn't considered too fat, quickly shook his head and said, no way. I can only teach my students. Is this a rule of the Life School of Thought? He might have made an oath with some secret existence as a witness. Klein wasn't surprised. At this moment, the apothecary let out a laugh. But I can tell you where you can get the apothecary formula. It's right here in Backlund. Brilliant. Klein was pleasantly surprised. Realizing that Eye of Wisdom was about to send him off, he hurriedly asked, Mr. Apothecary, do you have any medication to treat mental disorders and other problems? Klein was acting for Miss Bodyguard, to make her feel more assured, having been slightly influenced by the true creator and becoming a potential lunatic, that he was desperately trying to find a cure. Yes, there's a sedative, 10 solely for one. I'll bring you 4 in the next gathering. Trust me, this is definitely much more useful than the ones in the hospitals. I've added some materials with spirituality, the apothecary replied without hesitation. How expensive? In the underground market at Tingen, the number of sedatives that originated from the hospitals ranged from 1 to 2 solely, while the variety that leaked from the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, and machinery hive mind ranged from 4 to 5 solely. As this thought flashed through his mind, Klein put on a show, looked at Eye of Wisdom, and said, Dear sir, may I attend the next gathering? Yes, your last 2 performances are proof of your goodwill. Young lad, watch out for the Backlund Morning Post daily. When there's an advertisement for the purchase of goods by the Ernst firm on the 5th page, it means that there would be a meeting here at 8 o'clock the next evening. The strength and the frequency of the knocking is based on the prices listed. The first number is the number of heavy strikes. The second number is the number of light strikes. The third number is the number of long pauses and the fourth is the number of short pauses. The rest are meaningless, Eye of Wisdom said with a nod. After describing the information, he sighed and said, the lives of Beyonders who are neither official or part of an organization aren't as nice as you imagine. On the one hand, we have to keep secrets, avoid the officials, and at any time, we have to maintain a cautious and careful state. On the other hand, we have to fight against the possibility of losing control and madness. Too many of our kind have died because of these 2 matters. Even if we successfully evade the officials' notice and avoid losing control and going crazy, we would still fall into the predicament of lacking ingredients and the inability to find items we want or obtain sufficient knowledge. I organized such a gathering to get everyone to help each other. Unfortunately, this is an era of scarce mysteries. Many Beyonder ingredients are rarely seen. Yes, but I have Mr. Hanged Man who knows the coordinates of some of the primitive islands, and City of Silver's the son who is constantly fighting against the various monsters in the depths of the darkness. I can rely on them to obtain some of the Beyonder ingredients. Klein politely stood up with his back bent as he bowed to Eye of Wisdom. Your character is admirable. After sitting down again, Klein suddenly remembered something and asked after some deliberation, Gentlemen, do you have any mystical items? The kind that Black Snake sold me, but ones without too serious negative effects. I wish to have some sort of ability to protect myself. His plan was to find something that caught his interest, determine the price, and then determine the target accordingly. However, I don't have any money right now, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't have any in the future. Can't I make an inquiry about the price without money? Klein silently added in his heart. The apothecary spread out his hands, indicating that he didn't have any, and even if he did, he wouldn't sell them. Eye of Wisdom chuckled and said, I do have some, but I don't know what you would like to buy. Give me an approximate range. Some. He's most likely a savant pathway beyonder who relies on external items. Klein didn't hide his envy as he said, something stronger than me. Not something that improves my combat skills. It's best if it has some mystical powers. He didn't go into details so as to maintain his image as a newcomer. Eye of Wisdom smiled and said, I have an item that suits your requirements. Its former code name was 2-081, 2-081. Klein asked, puzzled. His puzzlement was just a disguise on the surface, but on the inside, he was very shocked. Is this a sealed artifact that leaked out from the Chinese gate of the Church of the Evernight Goddess? Klein didn't expect to see a familiar code name here. Eye of Wisdom casually explained simply, many mystical items have rather obvious side effects that can cause certain harm. Therefore, the 7 Orthodox churches would seek them out and seal them. They're called sealed artifacts and are distinguished using numbers as code names. Over a long period of debate and exchanges, the 7 churches formed a uniform naming convention. It labels the different danger grades with 0, 1, 2, and 3. Among them, 0 is the most dangerous. Rumors say that some are terrifying items that can destroy countries or even the world. The 7 Orthodox churches will exchange information regarding grade 0 and grade 1, telling each other which ones they possess. Therefore, grade 0 and grade 1 code names won't be repeated. Grade 2 and grade 3 are arranged by their respective churches, so different churches might have the same code name. Klein had long known about the general situation within the Nighthawks, but he was puzzled by something. Information regarding grade 0 and grade 1 sealed artifacts is exchanged. Wouldn't that be disclosing major secrets? It will allow the other churches to know how many hidden cards they have. Of course, this could also be seen as a form of strategic deterrence, to avoid direct conflict between the 7 churches. Klein considered the possible reasons. Yes. Although I'm unable to explain the reason for doing that, it has indeed happened. Legend has it that during the end of the 4th epoch or the beginning of the 5th epoch, the 7 churches came to an agreement, Eye of Wisdom said at an unhurried pace. My 2-081 was obtained from the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. It allows you to understand and comprehend many things. Even an enemy's beyonder powers can be rapidly identified, allowing me to know of their strengths and weaknesses. I'll also have a chance at being able to mimic them. The stronger the opponent, the higher the chance of failure. Of course, even success would definitely result in a huge difference from the original. That sounds very strong. Proof that knowledge is power. In the end, will there be a situation where omniscience is equal to omnipotence? I retract my previous judgment. Old Mr. Eye of Wisdom might not be an appraiser. His identification of items might have relied on sealed artifact 2-081. Klein clicked his tongue silently as he asked with interest, so, how much would I need to buy it? What flaws does it have? It will keep you in a state where your mind is churning at high speeds. Once it exceeds the time limit, you'll become a retard, Eye of Wisdom replied simply without providing enough details. At this moment, the apothecary beside him muttered, perhaps your brain has already been damaged. You keep talking about your collection. Sooner or later, someone will rob you and kill you. Sir, your persuasions are always so repugnant. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. Eye of Wisdom laughed and said, how do you know that I'm not saying it on purpose to make greedy people attack me? Yes, it's like the entrapment law once described by Emperor Roselle. After the laughter stopped, he patted the armrest of his sofa and sighed. As a person who loves collecting things, it's excruciating not being able to flaunt my collection to others. He then looked at Klein. I'm sorry. 2-081 isn't for sale. It's my best collection, and back then, I spent £6,800 to buy it. A sealed artifact at this level can cost from £400 to £20,000 and is determined by its effects and negative side effects. However, most of time, they can't be bought with money. Then why did you say so much? Klein controlled the twitching of his mouth. Seemingly sensing his reaction, Eye of Wisdom chuckled and said, what I really wish to recommend are 2 items. The first is a brooch. It can allow you to ward off spirits and purify them, as well as use a portion of the spells in the Sun domain. The flaw is that as long as you wear it, you will never feel coolness. You will forever be stuck in the warm summer of the south. The other is a hat that can change shapes. Wearing it allows you to move freely underwater for at least half an hour and allows you to use some water or wind domain spells. The flaw is that you will desire water. Once you walk on land, you will gradually weaken. The prices of similar items range from £1,500 to £3,500, and sometimes, even if you raise the price several-fold, they aren't necessarily for sale because they rarely appear. It took me more than 3 decades to collect a few. Klein nodded slightly and said, I'll think about it, and I'll make the decision during the next gathering. At this point, he deliberately smiled and said, besides, I don't have that much money right now. Chapter 258, 258, the concrete road had turned dirty from prolonged rain. 2 gas lamps, the height of an adult male, along the 2 sides of the road emitted a bright but misty light due to the moisture on the glass. A rental carriage drove through the night as the surrounding pedestrians either wore hats or carried umbrellas. Klein leaned against the wall, idly admiring the evening streets of Backlund. At that moment, he suddenly felt the temperature inside the carriage drop significantly. A gloomy and cold wind was swirling about. Klein jerked his head around and saw that Miss Bodyguard, dressed in a black Gothic regal dress, was sitting across from him without him even realizing it. Her voice was ethereal and dreamy. That eye of wisdom sensed my presence. As expected. Klein nodded, unsurprised. He has several mystical items, perhaps he sensed you because of them. I even suspect that he has an organization behind him. Otherwise, it's quite impossible for Eye of Wisdom to collect several relatively powerful mystical items in 30 years with his power alone. Previously, Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos only had a single creeping hunger despite being one of the 7 great pirate admirals. Of course, it was possible that the latter had high standards and ordinary mystical items didn't catch his attention. After all, with creeping hunger, he could be more well-rounded and nearly be without any weaknesses. Yes, for Eye of Wisdom himself to be rich there has to be a rather good explanation as well. He's organized so many gatherings, and once he finds a suitable mystical item, he would spare no expense to get it. Having a few in his collection isn't that unbelievable. Sigh, it's like he has a gold mine at home, or he runs a bank. Klein lampooned silently. He didn't mention in detail that he had guessed that Eye of Wisdom was from the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, or from the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, out of fear that he would expose to Miss Bodyguard that he wasn't someone who had just become a Beyonder. The blonde Miss Bodyguard nodded slightly, as though agreeing with Klein's suspicions. Suddenly, she frowned and looked at the window opposite her. A rich smell of blood. There's a strong smell of blood. Klein turned his head in puzzlement and looked out the window. There was a secluded alley in the sparse drizzle. Near the mouth of the alley, a woman wearing a gorgeous dress was on the ground. At that moment, a pedestrian walked past and on careful inspection, let out a sudden scream. The scream startled the horse slightly as the carriage driver quickly tightened the reins, slowing down the carriage. Under the light of the gas lamp, Klein saw the pale face of the woman lying on the ground at the mouth of the alley. There was a deep gash in her stomach, and her internal organs seemed to have been hollowed out. The blood on the ground around her was flowing slowly, crimson and thick. This. As a qualified former Nighthawk, he quickly thought of many similar cases. These were often related to devil worship. And when it came to devil worship, it was almost always tied to ancient organizations. It was the Blood Sanctifice sect that first appeared in the Fourth Epoch. According to the records, this was a loose alliance formed due to the worship of devils. It consisted of several so-called devil clans, such as the Noise, Ariel, and Beria clans. They weren't subordinate to each other. In their bid to proselytize faith in the devil, they committed many murders. Back in Tingen, the accountant for the Nighthawks, Mrs. Oriana, was one such victim who was thankfully saved. Of course, not all similar cases were committed by them. Many people felt that such acts were very cool and began to imitate them. It looks like it was done by the Blood Sanctifice sect, Miss Bodyguard whispered as her figure rapidly turned translucent before vanishing. She didn't care if Klein understood her or comprehended the situation. At that moment, the carriage had already passed the scene of the crime. Klein also noticed that the patrolling police had arrived, so he held back his idea of getting off the carriage to observe and instead, chose to act as an ordinary citizen who was passing by. Yes, citizen Mr. Moriarty, the Blood Sanctifice sect has the criminal pathway, which is also known as the devil pathway. It's said that after sequence 7, the corresponding Beyonder would gradually turn demonic. However, they would only reveal those signs under certain circumstances. Sequence 9 criminals have strong bodies, keen instincts, and a variety of criminal abilities, but their conscience isn't gone yet. Sequence 8, known by its ancient name, Cold-Blooded, has the modern name, Unwinged Angel. It means that from that moment forth, they lose their conscience and revel in evil desires, with bodies that look even more inhuman. They would also obtain some of the magical powers of the devil. Sequence 7 serial killer grasps a good deal of knowledge and rituals regarding devil worship. They like to please the devil with special serial murders. I don't know the sequences after that. The information regarding the Blood Sanctifice sect and the devil pathway flashed past Klein's mind. The rain outside seemed to become heavier as the rain on the windows converged and fell, and the whole world became quiet and unclear. What's the point of thinking so much? Such matters would definitely be taken over by a Beyonder squad. It might be the mandated Punishers or Nighthawks. There's no need for me to worry. Klein shook his head with a laugh as he muttered in his mind. By the time he returned to 15, Minsk Street, he had forgotten about the murder case. He went next door and knocked on the Sammers' front door, asking Mrs. Stellan to tell Mary that she could come for the evidence tomorrow afternoon. Following that, he washed up and read the newspapers, learning about the current situation and news in Backlund. On Saturday morning the next day, Klein enjoyed his breakfast slowly and went out to pick up the freshly developed photographs. He chose the one with the best view of Doroga Gale's and Erica Taylor's face, one that brought out their passion the most. After putting the photos away, he went to the Rice police station before Mrs. Mary arrived and successfully got the bail money that was worth £10 back. In the process, he also saw the real Sergeant Faxine and felt a little uncomfortable. After withdrawing the remaining £500 in cash from his account, Klein was finally done with everything after having a busy morning. Before he prepared lunch, he handed the remaining £600 to Miss Bodyguard in one go, leaving £146 8 solely, and 5 pence on him. That was all his liquid funds. Other than Miss Justice, I have no other debts. Klein cooked himself a T-bone steak and sprinkled it with black pepper sauce. Just as he was enjoying the taste of the medium-well steak whilst in a good mood, the doorbell suddenly rang and resounded through his house. Mrs. Mary? Isn't this too early? Puzzled, Klein put down his fork and knife, and he walked to the door. He paused for 2 seconds as the image of the visitor outside the door appeared in his mind. It was an old-fashioned gentleman in a light grey overcoat, a silk top hat, and he held a black and gold cane. He had sharp blue eyes, and his temples were streaked with white. His wrinkles were deeply engraved in his face, causing his facial muscles to seemingly sag. May I know who you're looking for? Klein asked after opening the door. The old gentleman said in a thick mid-seashore accent, Are you Sherlock, Detective Moriarty? Do you have something you wish to entrust to me? Klein nodded and made way, leading the old gentleman into the living room. He hesitated for 2 seconds, then asked, Would you like coffee or tea? A cup of hot water, please. The old gentleman had taken off his hat and sat down. Very well, it's very simple. Maybe I should consider getting an assistant to serve tea and clean the place. As Klein's mind wandered, he turned to the kitchen and rinsed a glass. After placing the hot water in front of the old gentleman, he walked to the sofa and sat down with his hands folded. How may I address you? Millet Carter, the old gentleman answered simply. Mr. Carter, what would you like to entrust me with? Klein asked directly without bothering to exchange pleasantries. As he spoke, he quietly activated his spirit vision to observe Carter. This old gentleman is in quite good health. There are some problems with the color of the joints of his left leg, probably arthritis. His emotions are mostly blue from calm thinking, with a hint of anxiety. With just a glance, Klein had come to a general conclusion. Millet Carter lifted the white porcelain cup and, while rubbing its surface, said, The thing is, I've bought a house on William Street. I come from mid-seashore and because of my business, I'll be living in Backlund permanently. William Street. Where's that? Having been in Backlund for less than a month, Klein, who had to consult the map or rely on his intuition, tried his best to appear staid and reliable. Millet Carter looked at him, and under his gaze, he continued, Rumor has it that the house was originally owned by a bankrupt viscount. That was about 2 to 3 decades ago. After a few changes of hands, I finally bought it. I planned on doing some renovations that suited the modern style, but I discovered a hidden secret door in the basement which leads to a very large underground structure. Considering that it might not be safe inside, I temporarily stopped construction, and I prevented the workers and servants from rashly exploring it. I hope that you can help me confirm the situation inside the underground structure. Underground structure. Ancient ruins. Secret treasure. Klein thought and said, "Why didn't you call the police? The resources that the police can mobilize are more than 100 times that of a private detective like me can muster. The results of the exploration will definitely be better and more reliable." Millet Carter rubbed his nose bridge. "I don't want too many people to know about this, especially the government. If I confirm that there is no danger within the underground structure, then I intend to use it as part of the structure and repurpose it. I know that this is a high risk for you, and I'm willing to pay £50 for it. But you can't have more than 3 assistants, and I can make up for it later, depending on the circumstances. £50, that's quite a high price. If I were an ordinary detective, that would be equivalent to 2 or 3 months of my income. He's just arrived in Backland and doesn't know any other detectives. He could only read the newspapers to look for hires and ended up coming to me." Klein hesitated for a few seconds. "Let me think about it." He suddenly revealed an apologetic smile, pointed behind him and said, "I need to use the bathroom." Millet Carter nodded slightly and took a sip of hot water. After entering the bathroom and closing the wooden door, Klein looked at the mirror and took out a copper penny. Because he had Miss Bodyguard with him, he couldn't confirm it above the grey fog, so he could only rely on his own divination skills. "I should accept this commission." Klein chanted 7 times and flicked the coin as he watched it tumble down. Thud. The copper coin fell into his palm, and the king's portrait faced up, indicating a positive response. Klein slightly nodded, and whispered into the air, "What does your intuition tell you?" Miss Bodyguard's figure quickly appeared in the mirror. She replied expressionlessly, "There's a certain amount of danger, but it's not great." "Very good." Klein put away the coin, washed his hands, and walked out of the bathroom and into the living room. He looked at Millet Carter and said with a smile, "I'll take this commission." Chapter 259. After signing a contract with Millet Carter and receiving an advance payment of £10, Klein didn't rush to William Street immediately. Instead, he made an appointment for 4 in the afternoon. Millet was understanding with regard to this. Alone, Detective Sherlock Moriarty definitely had to recruit people to carry out the exploration. When the old gentleman left, Klein immediately returned to the dining table and cut the steak which had turned cold before wolfing it down. Seriously, doesn't he need to eat lunch? Why must he pick such a time to come? After barely filling his stomach, Klein bitterly began cleaning up. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Mrs. Mary arrived as scheduled. Her eyes were slightly red and puffy, but her face was turning gloomy. Stellan Sammer, who accompanied her, had no choice but to maintain her silence. Klein handed over an envelope containing his carefully chosen photo. "Madam, please confirm it." Mary paused for 2 seconds and slowly took in a breath. Then, she took the envelope, pulled out the photo, and examined it. "Excellent, very excellent. You're the most efficient and responsible detective I've ever met. I'm honored to introduce you as a member of the Quelag Club. This is the remaining £7 for the payment. You deserve it." Mary took out a wallet from her leather handbag and counted out a £5 note and 2 £1 notes. Then, without waiting for Klein's response, she stuffed the photo back into the envelope, put it into her handbag, and abruptly got up to leave. Tap. 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 Her buttonless boots made hurried sounds as she stomped on them. Stellan Sammer struggled to keep up. As she opened the door, Mary stumbled and almost fell, but fortunately, Stellan caught her. With this episode, Mary clearly slowed down and seemed to turn calm. "Madam, you forgot to take the portable camera. I'll give it to Mrs. Sammer later, and she'll bring it to you." Klein silently watched this scene, slightly shaking his head without saying anything. He returned to the second floor, took a nap, waking up comfortably to the bell chimes of the nearby church. Klein had already searched the map and confirmed that William Street was at the border of the West Borough and Empress Borough, a residential area in the heart of Backland. A nice house in West Borough and Hillston Borough costs about £2,500. Millet Carter's house is close to Empress Borough, and it's a property of a former viscount. The area is definitely sizable. The total purchase price will be at least £3,500, maybe even £5,000. That will be enough for a pretty decent mystical item. He actually came visiting me without a housekeeper or an attendant, perhaps because he's new in Backland and hasn't settled in. Klein put on his double-breasted coat, hat, and held his cane before heading out into Minsk Street. The gas lamps haven't been lit yet, and the streets were surprisingly darker than during the evenings. However, the air was fairly alright, without the suffocating air in the boroughs to the east. Taking a rental carriage, he went all the way to William Street. Klein saw a waiting manservant outside the Unit 8 house. The manservant, who was dressed in a red vest and light-colored trousers, bowed respectfully at the incoming visitor. "Good afternoon, might I inquire if you are Detective Moriarty?" "Yes, I have an appointment with Mr. Carter." Klein nodded and followed the manservant into a mansion with a garden and lawn. The house was 2 stories tall. The first floor was in a mess, with a lot of construction materials placed everywhere. There were workers coming in and doing some modifications. Millet Carter wasn't wearing a hat. Covering his nose, he walked over. "I'm very sorry about the mess and dirt here, but I do wish that everything will be fine before my family arrives in Backland. I can only urge them to keep working non-stop." Having said that, he looked at the manservant and instructed, "Continue watching them." It's no wonder that he didn't bring any servants with him. Even his servants have become supervisors. Klein smiled and said, "I know a lot of doctors. They tell me that the newly renovated houses aren't suitable for immediate occupation. One has to wait at least 3 months to ventilate it well enough. Otherwise, old people and children who aren't strong enough will easily fall sick." "Is that so?" Millet led Klein to the basement and asked doubtfully. "I've never verified it, but I chose to believe in authority. It's said that this originated from the words passed down by Emperor Roselle." Klein casually fabricated an excuse. Millet nodded, then turned to look at the door. He couldn't help but frown before asking, "Mr. Detective, you didn't bring an assistant? There might be quite a bit of danger in that structure." "I have an assistant, it's just that you can't see her." Klein lampooned as he said seriously, "This is my first visit, so I'll advance very carefully. If there are any problems, I will immediately retreat. I'm experienced in this area, so I won't put myself in a dangerous situation. If I were matched with inexperienced assistants, it might easily affect my nimble and decisive actions." Millet was startled. "You're very professional." "A professional bluff," Klein silently added. Without any further doubts, Millet led Detective Moriarty through the cluttered living room and down the stairs to a fairly spacious basement. There were no gas pipes here, but 4 metal candlesticks were set into the walls, their yellow lights flickering. Stepping on the stone pavements on the ground, Klein couldn't help but sigh in reflection. As expected of a noble's property. Even the basement has been nicely decorated. Furthermore, it's almost as big as the living room of my current house. At this moment, Millet pointed ahead and said, "There's a secret door over there. It was discovered by the workers when they were renovating." Klein focused his gaze. With the not very bright candlelight, he saw a gray stone door in the corner. It should have been part of the wall, but it was now exposed. "I'll leave the rest to you. Be safe." The old gentleman, Millet, gave Klein a lighted lantern and cautioned him. "Has this place been ventilated ahead of time?" Klein asked cautiously. Millet shook his head indiscernibly. "It's not particularly stuffy inside, but I didn't let the workers go too far." "All right." Klein checked his belongings, put on a black glove, and, under Millet's gaze, unhurriedly carried the lantern and approached the stone door. He pushed it open with his cane. Amidst the heavy creaking sounds, through the light outside, he saw a deep-colored passageway paved with stone. There were several wooden doors on both sides of the passageway and at the end. They had already begun to rot, but they were still barely usable. Not too ancient. However, the ostentatious style of the door and the depth and thickness of the stone slabs don't match. Did the Viscount's family change it before? Klein quietly activated his spirit vision, gripped his cane, and walked forward, step by step, with the lantern in hand. The light dispersed the darkness, and when he passed by the rooms on either side, he was able to see a somewhat empty scene through the open door, which was likely open due to the exploration from the workers Millet had hired. There was also a long bench and a table that shared the same aesthetic style as the door. There's no sign of spirits flashing. Klein did a brief inspection. Without stopping, he proceeded forward until he came to the end of the hall where a bifold black stone door was. Stretching out his gloved right hand, he half-clamped his cane and slowly pushed against the door. A jarring sound of friction began to reverberate through the air as the stone door slowly cracked open. Spirit light suddenly appeared in Klein's eyes, reflecting an intertwined aura of different colors. His heart tightened as he pushed the door open, before taking a few steps back. The crack in the stone door widened rapidly, and a slimy black creature fell from above. It was a snake with a triangular head and red floral patterns on its head. It straightened its upper body, shot out its tongue, and looked at Klein with cold brown eyes. One snake after another fell from above the door as they piled up at the entrance. Klein saw a large hall beyond them. In the middle of the hall, countless snakes of various colors slithered together, forming an exaggerated nest of snakes about 10 meters wide. The slimy, disgusting feeling assaulted his senses. Klein felt his scalp turn numb as he couldn't help but take 2 steps back. He even wanted to look away without daring to look straight ahead. Although he was a man, he was still afraid of snakes. Snakes were the animal that he was most afraid of. This stemmed from a psychological trauma in the past. When he was a child, despite being way past his bedtime, he liked to secretly open the door to his room and watch movies with his parents through a crack. Unfortunately, his parents once watched a snake disaster movie. One scene involved the demolition of a building. The result was the unearthing of a large nest of snakes, and the dense squirming remained deeply imprinted in his mind. Can the slumber charm affect so many snakes? Klein swallowed hard and said to the air, "Do you have any solutions?" Miss Bodyguard in her black Gothic dress quickly appeared by his side, her mouth tightly closed. She didn't say a thing. Klein looked at her and she looked back at Klein, but no one spoke. When a snake slowly slithered out, Klein finally coughed and repeated, "Do you have any solutions?" Miss Bodyguard didn't answer. Instead, she floated and suddenly, a cold wind blew in the passageway. Whoosh! The wind howled as it blew into the hall. The temperatures dropped rapidly as it approached the temperatures of the outside world. Whoosh! The densely packed snakes in the middle of the hall suddenly slithered in all directions, searching for a warmer, more suitable spot to survive. 2 to 3 minutes later, a thin layer of frost formed on the surface of the hall and the passageway, and countless snakes had disappeared without much of a trace. Whoosh! They continued as Klein said, chattering, That's quite enough." The surging cold wind slowed down, but the cold didn't subside. Miss Bodyguard's figure disappeared once again. Klein lifted his cane-wielding right hand, covered his mouth and nose, and sneezed. Then, he raised the lantern and cautiously walked through the stone door into the wide hall. The style here was identical to the passageway outside. There were 8 circular columns of the same color erected there. Metal poles hung from the high dome, and at the bottom were candlesticks carved into different creatures. An upside-down candlestick. As a university student of the history department, a person who could barely be called an elite in this field, Klein made a preliminary judgment based on this unique arrangement. A structure of the 4th epoch. Chapter 260. The history circles of the northern continent countries all recognized that the fourth epoch was shrouded in thick mystery. It was impossible to tell what it truly was. The historical records had too many missing pieces and ambiguities for this period of history. There were too few tombs, ancient cities, and literature that had been unearthed to create an effective confirmation. However, this didn't mean that no one had done the relevant research. Its rarity implied that there were still some relics and information left behind. The original Klein was a fanatic towards the history of the fourth epoch. He often read journal articles and books, so even now, Klein still remembered a lot of content. Whether it was the Solomon Empire, Tudor Empire, or Trunsoist Empire, they all had similar architectural styles that went against common sense. They were disorderly, asymmetrical, and they stood out for their frequent use of black. The most typical characteristic were the candlesticks hanging from the ceiling and the chopped floral pattern marks on black walls. This was precisely why Klein's first reaction was that the underground structure belonged to the fourth epoch when he raised his lantern. He had seen circular metal poles with candlesticks embedded at the bottom, that ran down from the dome, reminding him of the fourth epoch which was shrouded in mystery, leaving many historians and archaeologists regretful of the lack of knowledge in that ancient period. Several journal articles have mentioned that the number of candlesticks within different buildings are different. Although the three empires find asymmetry beautiful, they seem to have strict and meticulous rules in every aspect. 3 on the left, and 2 on the right is the highest standards that ordinary citizens can enjoy. This is based on the structure of the buildings and the houses that remain. Klein raised his arm and held the lantern high. He walked slowly, counting the candlesticks on both sides. The hall was even wider than he had expected. He had walked for at least 100 meters before he saw a platform half a meter above the ground. Only then did he see the thick wall that marked the end of the hall. 41 inverted candlesticks on the left, and 40 on the right. This is a bit of an exaggeration. What level of aristocracy is this? Powerful nobility? The Antigonus and the Zeridal families are all aristocrats of the fourth epoch. They were also powerful and terrifying beyond their family clans. The other noble families should be about the same. Holding the lantern in hand, Klein continued onward. He saw the stairs at the side of the half-height platform and saw the scuffing on the black stone tiles. Is this really a relic of the fourth epoch? A thought flashed through Klein's mind. With his keen eyesight and the light from the lanterns, he found 2 iron black seats on top of the platform that was half a meter above the ground. The huge, ancient seats overlooked the other seats below. There were 2 seats. 2. Why 2? According to the layout, the seat here should represent the person with the most power and authority, but there are 2 of them. A powerful noble of equal strength? A double count, a double duke, or a double prince? Klein slowly began to feel that his knowledge of history was inadequate. He clearly remembered that many journal articles mentioned that the 3 empires, Solomon, Tudor, and Trunsoist, had a strict hierarchy. Based on this theory, there shouldn't have been leaders of equal standing within a faction. Strange. Klein mumbled, in a way meant for Miss Bodyguard. What's so strange about that? An ethereal voice suddenly sounded from behind him. In the vast, dark, empty, and silent ancient hall, this voice was exceptionally frightening. Klein's mouth twitched as he explained the characteristics, history knowledge, and puzzling points that he had observed to her. He eventually added, the ventilation here is very good. I wonder if there are any other entrances. Miss Bodyguard, who had mostly blended into the darkness, listened silently as she gave Klein a penetrating glance. How do you know so much? Because I was a university student in the history department. Klein cursed silently before smiling. If I hadn't chosen to be a detective, perhaps I would have become a diligent young historian. Miss Bodyguard didn't respond, nor did she disappear. Instead, she floated up to the platform first. With the lantern in hand, Klein quickly followed, discovering that the platform was very large. It was about 40 meters in length and 10 meters in breadth. The architectural style is grand and enlarged. It's also one of the characteristics of the fourth epoch, he said casually as he carefully approached the two huge iron-black chairs. He then raised his lantern and carefully inspected it. It seems to be meant for a 3-meter-tall giant to sit on. There's an emblem on the back of the chair. On this side, it's a black crown. On the other side, it's a hand holding onto a scepter. I wonder what they symbolize on their own. Klein said to himself, not expecting an answer from Miss Bodyguard. However, the lady who was floating suddenly said, "This is the Tudor family's emblem." Huh? Klein looked over in surprise, noticing that Miss Bodyguard was referring to the hand holding the scepter. Tudor family? Is this a relic of the fourth epoch's Tudor dynasty? Which royal family member owned this palace? Klein frowned and said, "Do you recognize the other emblem? To think that it was ranked as equal to a Tudor family member." Miss Bodyguard shook her head without a word. Seeing this, Klein had to give up the idea of studying it for the time being and said, after the Tudor and Trunsoist families established their respective empires, they both maintained the original style that originated from the Solomon Empire, such as inverted candlesticks, scuffed marks, and so on and so forth. This doesn't comply with common sense. If I were the emperor, even if I had to inherit many things, I would still make certain changes to mark my uniqueness. Does this mean that the three empires have hidden, unchanging connections? He guessed that Solomon, Tudor, and the Trunsoist families wielded the Dark Emperor, which was the lawyer pathway. Similar styles were needed for acting. Miss Bodyguard remained silent for a few seconds before saying a few words. Only an emperor can be called an emperor. Is this a confirmation of my idea? Klein didn't ask any more questions. With the lantern in hand, he circled the two huge iron-black chairs, but he didn't discover anything else. Let's take a look ahead, Klein suggested. Before he finished his sentence, Miss Bodyguard had already floated towards the end of the platform, but the surrounding gloominess and coldness remained unchanged. A few meters ahead, Klein saw, with the help of the lantern's glow, 7 large, heavy, black stone doors at the base of the hall. They were lined up, 2 on the left, 1 in the middle, 4 on the right, perfectly in line with the fourth epoch's pursuit of asymmetry. Klein passed the cane to his lantern hand, tossed a coin at random, and whispered, "I should begin from the left." Ding! The copper penny tumbled down and landed on his palm, portrait facing up. "Let's go to the left." Klein took the lead. Miss Bodyguard silently followed until they reached the door on the far left before saying ethereally, "It's the same on the right." In other words, it didn't matter whether I did the divination. The corner of Klein's mouth curled up as he raised the lantern and examined the symbols and patterns on the door. With a deep black background, it was a crimson half-moon that was surrounded by radiant points of light. This. Klein's pupils constricted suddenly. This is the dark sacred emblem. The symbol of the Evernight goddess. During the fourth epoch, the Church of the Evernight goddess had supported the Tudor dynasty. He thoughtfully placed his hand on the stone door. Screech. The black stone door slowly opened amidst rough and heavy grinding sounds. As the light from the lantern shone into the room, Klein began to see the interior, bit by bit. There was a few meters of open space at the entrance, also paved with dark stone tiles, and a platform nearly a meter high. Klein cautiously moved forward, holding up the lantern to illuminate the item on the platform. A few seconds later, a fiery radiance formed the outline of a huge statue. It was about 4 to 5 meters long and almost filled the entire room. It was an extremely beautiful lady with a hazy face. Her right hand supported her head as she laid down on the platform. She wore a layered black classical dress that wasn't overly complex. There was a circle of radiating rays at the bottom of her head. On this lady's dress, there were sparkling specks of radiance. They were pieces of bright and resplendent gems. At first glance, Klein felt as though he was seeing the night and the stars. This was outlined against a circular shape under the lady's head that resembled a full moon. This. Klein's thoughts seemed to freeze, but a guess immediately plowed its way from within. Evernight goddess. Miss Bodyguard's voice carried a rare hint of puzzlement. Be it the symbolism or the actual form, it seemed to be a sculpture of the goddess. Klein's guess finally took shape, echoing loudly in his mind. He remembered asking Captain Dunn Smith about one of the differences between an evil god and a true god. The former was said to have an image that resembled that of an intelligent life form, but the latter only had sacred emblems formed by symbols. But today, at this very moment, in this ancient and bizarre underground structure, he saw a statue that looked like the Evernight goddess. What did this mean? Just thinking about it made Klein shudder. Could it be that the goddess was once an evil god? No. Maybe it's some other evil god that falls into the night domain. However, the dark sacred emblem by the door is no different from the one that is being used presently, or perhaps, having the image of an intelligent being isn't a standard method to distinguish between true gods and evil gods. After all, the captain's level wasn't high enough, and his understanding of the situation wasn't necessarily accurate enough. It was also possible that the tutors were deliberately blaspheming the goddess. Yes, it could also be a way of setting up some strange ritual. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. It left him feeling puzzled, nervous, and tense. However, he also felt a strange feeling which couldn't be described. After looking around, Klein, who didn't see anything else, took a deep breath and said, "Let's go to the other doors and take a look. I wonder what the other 6 doors correspond to. Would it be equally strange and evil?" He thought gravely. Miss Bodyguard nodded slowly.